Man alive, this car is fun! Woo-hoo-hoo-hoo! In this video, it is one of the biggest automotive disasters of all time. It's the Nissan Cherry Europe, which you may know better as the Alfa Romeo Arna. So what we have here is an intriguing mix of Italian running gear, but with a bland Japanese car body. So let's explore how that came about, because it's fascinating. So the Arna came around at a troubled time for Alfa Romeo. It was independent, albeit state-owned at the time, so it didn't have any tie-ups with any other manufacturers. With the Alfasud reaching the end of its production life towards the end of the 1970s, Alfa Romeo knew they needed to develop a car. What they actually did was develop two new cars. So they developed the 33, which was like an extension of the Alfasud, but try and move up a market sector to so they could put the list price up. And then they wanted a new entry-level car to come in underneath that, and that's where this car comes in. Alfa Romeo approached Nissan. Nissan were all ears because they were looking for a backdoor way into the European market. Import quotas meant Nissan couldn't sell as many cars in Europe as it would like. So perhaps if it built a car in Europe, it could achieve the sales volume they so desired. They've been watching companies like British Leyland and Honda tie up. So the Triumph Acclaim was just a rebadged Honda, and that was Honda's way of getting into the European market. Perhaps this could be the same. The deal was signed in 1980, and a brand new factory was created 20 kilometers from the Alfasud factory down in Naples. So some of the work was done there. Quite a lot of the car was shipped in from Japan, but 85% had to be local manufacture. So big body panels were shipped in, and they used the N12 Pulsar, sold as the Cherry in Europe, as their base. We'll have a look under the bonnet and see what changes were made there, because that's where things get really interesting. So under the bonnet, in place of Nissan's transverse engine installation, we have a longitudinal engine from the Alfasud. So there's massive changes under here. We've got this strengthening bar going between the strut towers. So much of the metalwork you can see in the engine bay is specific to the Arna. But once you get beyond this, it's all pure Nissan. So somehow they managed to cram the Boxer 4 in here with the gearbox behind. The brakes are now in the hub. They're not on the ends of the drive shafts as they come out of the gearbox. And it's an intriguing mix. But even though this car has Nissan badges, it has the Alfa Romeo name across the top of the engine cover. The grille actually sticks out, and the headlamps protrude to allow room for the radiator. The radiator is directly below here, so it's incredibly tight for space, but somehow they managed to cram it in. This is a GTI, but it's a GTI that's misnamed. I usually stands for injection, but we've got twin Dell'Orto carburetors here. And a quick reference to my earlier test of an Alfasud Sprint Veloce, I incorrectly said it was one carburetor. It is two, one for each bank. In terms of external changes, there was very little the Alfa Romeo stylists could do, but they did come up with these wraparound headlamps, which look a bit ugly and plain in hindsight, but in the terms of when they were new, I think they're actually quite smart, and referencing cars like the Morris Ital and certain Mazdas, I think. So it's a new interesting take on it, but you can see this big lip on the top, and that's because the whole headlamp and grille assembly has had to be pushed forward to make room for the radiator that sits right behind here. It's a similar story at the rear. The rear panel is actually from the Langley, which was a Japanese domestic market version of the Pulsar or Cherry, but we can see Nissan Cherry Europe to highlight that European build, and these slim rear lights, which I think look a lot better than the huge slab-like rear lights we got on the Cherry here. So yeah, I think in some ways that's an improvement. You see there's a little black trim strip under here just to make up the depth that was available. But these cosmetics were all the Alfa stylists could do. They couldn't change any of the sheet metal. Although there are some intriguing things, like there is no external release for the boot at all, whereas the Cherry, you could insert a key to open the boot. On this, you've only got an internal handle. Incidentally, despite being a Datsun, This is one of very few Datsuns. In fact, it's probably the only Datsun that has won a concourse medal at an Alfa Romeo event, because it is, to all intents and purposes, an Alfa Romeo. Now, one thing Alfa Romeo did get right was build quality. The way the doors shut is very not Alfa, it's much more Nissan. As we move inside, we've got these gorgeous seats in the GTI, this green stripe down the middle, very supportive. The seat frames are Japanese and came in from Nissan. The rest of the seats are pure Alfa Romeo. But as we jump aboard, we've got the steering column straight out of an Alfasud, and the gear lever also, but the rest is Nissan. It's quite a complex pressing, the dashboard, so the dashboard came across complete from Nissan. So we've got a mixture of Alfa Romeo switchgear and Nissan switchgear, and obviously very Japanese heater controls here. That boxer engine is water cooled, so you do get a very effective heater, but it's an odd mix of yeah, this driving position feels very Italian, but you've got this really rather nasty, I think, Japanese dashboard. Japanese interiors weren't the best at this time. They were still finding their feet. The choke control is particularly interesting because it's under here, completely hidden from view. I can't see that from the driver's seat at all. The pedals are slightly offset. There is a bit of wheel arch intrusion. We do get somewhere to rest your clutch foot, so that's pretty good. Gear change, quite a long throw on it, feels a bit clunky, very much like an Alfasud because it is straight out of one. But the further back you go, the more Nissan the car gets. But it's really lovely driving position, really comfortable. We'll take a quick hop in the back just to see what the back seat's like. All right, let's go, get into the rear. We do that. Oh, incidentally, a lot of the facts for this video have come from this truly excellent book by Matteo Licata, The True Story of the Alfa Romeo Arna. Utterly fantastic read, that, well recommended. I've pulled that lever, and can we then slide the seat forward? No, that's it. Okay, right, that's fine. We'll squeeze into the back, and pull the seat back, and it's a little cozy back here. My head is on the headliner, but this seat is so soft and comfortable. Huge storage bin down here, so I can store things. I can open the window should I wish, but I think it's best to say that this car is best enjoyed from those front seats. Moving to the boot, I've pulled the release. We've got a lovely rubber spoiler here to obviously add some serious downforce, serious motor car. And we lift up, we've got a parcel shelf which is unique to the Arna. And something else is unusual is you've got these little storage areas either side, which is a little peculiar. But you've got a parcel shelf which oddly lifts in that way as well. And it's a reasonable space under here, but there is a full-size spare wheel lurking beneath. So that robs a certain amount of space from the boot. And a really high lip, but again, quite typical of hatchbacks at the time. They were yet to learn about having a lower entrance point. In terms of suspension, fittingly, both cars used a McPherson strut front end, so it was quite easy for Alfa Romeo to adapt their own existing suspension to the Pulsar body shell. At the rear, Nissan used a trailing arm independent rear suspension, which meant this was the first Alfa Romeo with fully independent suspension. That's not necessarily a good thing, because the way the beam axle worked in the Alfasud, it kept the steering, the wheel geometry was always parallel to the road. With the trailing arm, there is no adjustment in camber as the car loads up and the body rolls, so it's actually slightly inferior, but we'll see whether that actually makes any discernible difference out on the road. Okay then, let's go for a drive. First of all, we've got the joy of seeing whether it'll actually start. This can be a bit of a palaver. Aha, there we go. Oh no. Come on. You can imagine how thrilled Nissan dealers were to deal with this car, having to deal with a temperamental Italian car. It was an intriguing mix, yet the first batch of production was actually right-hand drive cars for the UK. I don't know if this one was in that batch. Dates from 1984, so production started very late in 1983, and then the Arna production. Arna actually stands for Alfa Romeo Nissan Autoveicole, I think. So Alfa Romeo Nissan Automobiles. So that's where the Arna name comes from. But it sounds fantastic. So we'll get underway. So we've got the 1.5 litre engine here. So it's exactly the same engine and exactly the same level of tune, 95 brake horsepower, as the Sprint Veloce I drove fairly recently. Alfa Romeo weren't really able to do much with the rear suspension, but they did tweak it to induce some negative camber, so it does look slightly like the rear arm bearings have worn out. But we'll go for a drive and see what this thing's like. The suspension is quite firm. Oh yeah, and a bit crashy over obstacles like that. Oh. That's our 60 up. I'll have to close the window, it's getting a bit noisy. But yeah, it doesn't drive like a Nissan, funnily enough. It drives like an Alfa Romeo. But it must have been a struggle for those Nissan dealers, because they effectively had two performance versions of the Cherry. There was this slightly temperamental Alfa Romeo powered Cherry, the Cherry Europe, but they also had the Cherry Turbo, which was a different kind of lunacy, more torque steer and wait for it, bam, power delivery. But again, that would have had the Japanese reliability, so you can see why people might have found it a bit of a struggle trying to decide which car to go for. But certainly I think the warranty claims would have made the dealers more inclined to suggest going for the Cherry Turbo. But really the biggest problem with this car is the looks. An Italian car should look amazing, and the Alfasud, the 33, they really have a sharp edge, really European design, very stylish. And as much as I quite like the N12 Pulsar Cherry, it's not a pretty car at all. There is not a pretty line on it. There's some curious touches as well to these Alfa Romeo stalks. So the main beam is actually a little button. You switch the main beam on and off with that little button there, which just doesn't feel very appropriate. It's not really what you want when you're flying down a country lane and suddenly find someone coming the other way. There's a few trim rattles from the back, but generally this car feels very solid and very well put together. But the project was ultimately a failure. In 1986, the factory produced one Nissan Cherry Europe, the very last one, and struggled on for another year with Alfa Romeo Arna production. And the target of 60,000 cars a year, it just never happened. In the end, over the course of about 4 years, they produced 58,000 in total, of which only about 7,000 were the Nissan Cherry Europe. So this is a very, very rare car, especially as the cars didn't survive. They were panned when they were new, and people still love hating on these cars today. And that's a real shame, because yes, it was a commercial failure, but this is still a lot of fun, and it's very different. And I think the very boring, ordinary looks just completely hide the hilarious character of these cars. This example's only done 37,000 miles, but the owner does report things like the ignition barrel falling apart. So perhaps the build quality wasn't always so good. Ultimately, Nissan decided there was another approach that would be better to gain a foothold in Europe, and that was to build its own factories. It started off by actually going into Spain and taking over Ebro, the truck builder, and they were building Nissans in Spain until very recently. But they also built their own factory in Sunderland. Yeah, this is a lot of fun. Actually feels like the steering wheel is a bit too big. It's feeling a little vague on the dead ahead, but once you actually start turning, it's a wonderfully communicative setup. My goodness me, while we're trundling around in Louth, we could do the important business of the windscreen wiper test. So here we go. Oh yeah, that's not bad. Where does the stalk go? Up, round? Oh, you twist it round, of course. And there. Yeah, that's appalling. Got a very slight triangle of doom. We seem to have very tired wipers, but the whole point of a column stalk is you don't have to take your hands off the wheel. So why would you make it so you have to twist it? That seems very strange indeed. But yeah, there's no mist function, I don't think. Oh, no, that's the horn there. Okay. Sorry, Mr. Lorry Man, I didn't mean to peep the horn at you. I was just trying to work out. So the wiper stalk does the horn. Okay. This truly is Italian. Oh, wow. Escort RS Turbo. Very nice. That's what else the indicators remind me of. The Ford Escort Mark III. And let's face it, I'm going to get hate for this. The Mark III Escort is not a particularly pretty car. I think it's a fairly nice shape, but you wouldn't get overexcited about it, would you? Would you? Oh, we're going the opposite way to the RS Turbo. But yeah, that's a nice car. Oh, there's quite a lot of body roll. I don't believe there's an anti-roll bar. Oh yeah, that does roll a bit, but it grips and goes, and that's the important thing. I don't care about body roll. Yeah, that's a very usable amount of power on the public highway until you get stuck behind a Mitsubishi Mirage. But yeah, credit must come for the driving position. It's really, really comfortable. Oh yes. This car really does make 60 miles an hour feel an awful lot of fun. I would say the handling really isn't too bad at all. I don't think it's as sharp and precise as an Alfasud, but it still feels an awful lot better than a lot of contemporaries, and I think a lot better than a Cherry. So there was talk actually of doing a further collaboration, and Alfa Romeo was very keen, but when it lost its independence and became part of Fiat, Fiat quickly knocked all this on the head. But all this is related... Oh, that scared the hell out of me. All this is related in the truly excellent book. But yeah, I don't see why you'd hate on these cars. This is an entertaining drive, and is that not the most important thing? Frumpy for sure, but this is really an Italian car that is exceedingly good fun to drive. This car actually won Festival of the Unexceptional a good few years ago, possibly the first one. And so it's a multi-award winning car. It's won the Alfa Romeo Concours, it's done loads of things. And there was a Cherry Europe at this year's as well, and that's a different one. But there really are just a handful of survivors left. Oh, well, man alive, this car is fun! Woo-hoo-hoo-hoo! So there we go. I think we can conclude that the problem with us humans is too often we judge a book by its cover. We are completely looks obsessed. This frumpy mess just happens to be a very, very entertaining car to drive, and I'm very pleased to have had that opportunity. A commercial disaster, yes, but as a historic point in history, it's hugely important, it's hugely significant, and proof the Japanese don't always get it right, and the Italians quite often get it wrong, but it's very entertaining nonetheless. So thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in a future video. Farewell. My apologies folks, I forgot the rear wiper test. There we go. I don't think that rear wiper's seen an awful lot of use, so it's a bit slow. But a good sweep. very pleasing, I would say.